Okay, today's stuff we're going to be learning is Megillah Daf Yud Daled. This week of learning is sponsored anonymously for the Refuah Shlema of Tova Matzal Bat Chana Etel. Okay, we're going to get started from the very bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Bet. Vayomer HaMelech LaHaman. We're continuing in our drashot of the Megillah. We're on Perek Gimel Pasuk Yud Aleph. Vayomer HaMelech LaHaman, Kesef natun lach v'ha'am la'asot bo ketov be'einecha. So the king says to Haman, sure, you want to charge the money, no problem. And you can do with this nation whatever you want. The question is, why was Achashverosh so agreeable? To which the Gemara brings a parable. Amar Rabbi Abba, Mashal Achashverosh v'Haman lema hadavar domeh. To what is this similar? L'shnei bnei Adam, to two people. Echad yesh lo tel b'toch sadeh. One has a big mound of dirt in his field. And the other has a big ditch in his field. Obviously, the one with the big mound wants to get rid of his big mound. The one with the big ditch wants to get rid of the big ditch. Right? He's the one who has a ditch says, who's going to give me, right? I'd be happy to buy dirt to fill my hole. The one who has the big mound of dirt is very happy to have a ditch to put his dirt into and is happy to pay money for it. Right? One day they each find each other. This one's looking to get rid of his dirt. This one's looking to fill his hole. So he says, please sell me your mound of dirt. He says, take it for free, right? I would have paid money for this, to get rid of it. Take it for free, and both people are happy. So that's the way they assume this bond between Achashverosh and Haman to kill the Jews. It was like each one was happy for the help of the other. Okay, so now the king takes off his ring and puts his seal on the deed, right? And the deed is done, and besides the Haman wrote it, now it has the seal of the king. And then it says what happened? The Jews go into this Ta'anit, right? Som, ubechi, umisped. They start crying. They start basically, if you remember Masechet Ta'anit, right? Fasting is all about right? They start repenting and turning back to God. So here's one of the most painful lines. Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, Gdolah hasarat tabat yoter me-48 nevi'im v'sheva nevi'ot shenitnabu lehen liYisrael. Shekulam lo hichzirum lemutav v'ilu hasarat tabat hichziran lemutav. Right? What happened? All these prophets came and tried to get the Jews to repent. Nobody was as successful as the moment Achashverosh took off that signet ring and signed the deed to kill the Jews. That's what caused them, right? It's always, unfortunately, we always say it has to be a catastrophe for us to realize that it's time to turn back to God. So now we're going to get into, because we mentioned these 48 Nevi'im and 7 Nevi'ot, we're going to get into that whole thing about this number. So the first thing they say, and you wonder if maybe this is why this whole section is here in the first place, maybe because it is a bit of a strange section, this is going to connect back to the reading of the Megillah. Okay, we're going to say, Tanu Rabbanan, 48 Nevi'im v'sheva Nevi'ot nibnabu lahen liYisrael. Okay, back to the fact that we had these 48 Nevi'im and 7 Nevi'ot that prophesied for the Jewish people. Soon we'll get to who were they, okay? They didn't add or detract anything from what the Torah says. This is always the big thing, that Nevi'im are not allowed to make any new rules or mitzvot or commandments and take away anything from a commandment. Chutz mimikra Megillah, other than one important thing, the reading of the Megillah. So that's why I said maybe that's why this whole thing is here, because it wants to tell you how important the Megillah reading is, that it was instituted by the Nevi'im, which Navi, Mordechai, they say was a Navi, and it was instituted by him. So basically we're saying that's the only halachic thing that they instituted. And that's why I suggested, I don't think it's really the whole situation, but it is saying there's Mikra Megillah, which is, and that was where we started. That was what the whole beginning of the Masechet was about, the reading of the Megillah that was instituted by the Nevi'im. So my drush, so now they said, when they decided to institute Mikra Megillah, what were they thinking, right? It's something new. How could they do that? Amar Rabbi Chia bar Avin, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha, Umami abdut lecheirut amrinan shira. Just like we sing praise to God when we got out from slavery to freedom, right? When we're saved from death and instead we get to live, all the more so we should be saying Shira. By the way, this views the reading of the Megillah as if it's praise of God, okay, as if it's Shira. So, lo kol sheken, of course you're going to do it for that. And that's what they said. And that's why we're going to read the Megillah as a way of praising God. To which the Gemara asks a very, very famous question. Hallel nami nema. If so, then they should also be saying Hallel, because right, Hallel is praising God. So why don't we say Hallel on Purim? And this is a very famous question. So all the other holidays we say Hallel, and I see people are writing same reason for Yom Ha'atzmaut, why we and Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, right? We were saved, therefore we sing praise. So now they say, if that's the case, why Hallel also? So now they say, first answer, very famous answer, because you don't say Hallel on a miracle that happened outside of Israel. So now they say, wait a minute, Yetziat Mitzrayim, wait, getting out of Egypt, that certainly wasn't in Israel. So how can you say Hallel if it happened outside of Israel? So this is a very easy answer. Kedetanya, as it says in the Braita, Ad shelo nichnesu Yisrael la'aretz, huchsheru kol ha'aratzot lomar shira. Until the Jews got into the land of Israel, then everyone could say shira. But mishenichnesu Yisrael la'aretz, lo huchsheru kol ha'aratzot lomar shira. Until we got into Israel, then, of course, any miracle that happened to us was going to be outside of Israel. But once we got to the land of Israel, that's when this rule kicks in. So you'd see how Mitzrayim happened before, obviously, we got to Israel, and therefore that wasn't an issue. Obviously, we mean, we got to Israel in the time of Yoshua, and we really conquered the land, as opposed to earlier when the fathers lived there, and it was also Eretz Canaan, etc. Rav Nachman Amar. So that was answer number one. We're going to have three answers to this important question. Why don't we say Hallel on Purim? Answer number two. Rav Nachman Amar, Kriyata zo Hallela. What do you mean? Reading the Megillah is a form of Hallel. That was what we just said. We say Shira. It's Shira. It takes the place of Hallel, which means basically we do say Hallel. We're going to have to later try to reconcile. Well, if that's the case, didn't we just say if it happens in Chutz La'aretz, we don't need to say Hallel? This answer says we do need to say Hallel. It's just that we fulfill our obligation for Hallel through the reading of the Megillah, and therefore we don't need to say Hallel. Rav Amar, third answer, Bishlam Hatam, we understand when it came to Egypt, Halalu of Hashem, Velo of Paro. What happened? We came from being the slaves of Pharaoh to being the slaves of God only, right? Exclusively. Elahacha, Halalu of Hashem, right? Now, this is quoting part of Hallel, where we say, who's going to praise you? Those who are servants of God, meaning they're exclusively servants of God. Velo of Achashverosh, which means they're supposed to sing praise because we're slaves of God and we're no longer slaves of Achashverosh. But Akati of the Achashverosh on them. But here we weren't autonomous after the end of the Purim story, and that's the big difference between Purim and Hanukkah when it comes to Hallel. In Hanukkah, we had our own, we ruled over ourselves. Here we don't have our own rule. We're still under Achashverosh after the Purim story, and therefore we don't say Hallel. Now the Gemara asks, wait a minute. But what we said in response to the first answer, right? Let's just summarize. The first answer is that the first answer is, right, that it happened in Chutz La'aretz. The second answer was reading the Megillah is our Hallel. And the third answer was we don't say Hallel because we weren't self-autonomous. So now they say, but Ben Rav Nachman Kashya, both second answers seem to imply that if, number one, there wasn't Megillah reading, then we read Hallel. And if, number two, we weren't ruling over ourselves, but if we had been ruling over ourselves, we would have said Hallel. What do they do with the fact that it says, once we got into the land, you don't say Hallel for a miracle that happens outside of Israel? So they have a very simple answer. Once they went into exile, yes, once we got to the land in the time of Yoshua until the time of the destruction of the temple, we were in Israel, and you wouldn't do it if something happened in Chutz La'aretz. However, once there was a destruction of the temple and no one was living in Israel anymore, then it reverts back to the original time where if the miracle happens to the Jews, that's basically where the majority of the Jews are, maybe, or something like that, but that was the center. So yes, you would theoretically say Hallel. So there's a machloket about this, obviously, because the first opinion thinks that no, it isn't. But the second two opinions do believe that once they got out of Israel, then it would be the same, that a big miracle will happen outside that would require you to say Hallel. If it had all the criteria, right? You weren't saying Hallel in some other manner, and the Jews were self-autonomous. Okay, B'chuleka. So now we're going back to this 48 Nevi'im and 7 Nevi'ot. Are there not more than that? V'haktiv, vayhi ish echad min ha'ramatayim tzofim. Okay, this is the first verse in Sefer Shmuel. Okay, how to read this verse, whether it's Ramatayim Tzofim is the name of the place, or Ramatayim, and then Tzofim Ehar Ephraim is a continuation of that verse. That's not important to me right now. But what's important is this word Ramatayim. What is Ramatayim? So the first drasha, we're going to have three drashot. The first one is going to basically show us that there were definitely more than 48 prophets, or 55 altogether. Okay, because we have the 48 men and the 7 women. Echad mimatayim tzofim shenitnabu lehem liYisrael. Resh in gematria, in right the value, all the letters have a value, is 200, and the word matayim, even though it's missing an aleph, is 200. So basically, between the resh and the word matayim, they say it must be there were 200 nevi'im. So, because Tzofim is a prophet. It's a word for prophet. So that's what it means, Matayim Tzofim. So they say, here you have it. He was one out of 200 prophets. This is Elkanah, okay? It's the first verse in Sefer Shmuel, and it's about Elkanah, who then has 2 wives, Penin and Chana. Chana can't have children. And then ultimately she prays to God and has a child, which is Shmuel. So now Elkanah was a prophet. Later we'll see that Chana was one of the prophets, also one of the female prophets. So now they say, there really were more. Not only were there 200, there were way more than that. It says in the bright, double the amount of the people that came out of Egypt. That sounds like a big exaggeration, right? 1,200,000 prophets. Ela nivu'ah shehutzrecha ledorot nichteva. We only get the ones that were necessary for future generations. There were prophets that prophesied about all sorts of things that happened in their own time. It's only thing, those just didn't get written down. What we have written down, and the 48 and the 7 are people who prophesied about things that would happen down the road in the future. If it wasn't needed for future generations, lo nichtiva. Okay, now I want to stop for a quick minute and look at Rashi. Rashi says, right, so what does it mean, okay, to teach us something, to cause us to repent, or some sort of teaching for the future. And that's why the 48, he's talking right now about the male prophets. And now he starts to list them. He says, okay, they're listed from the Seder Olam. Here they are. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Okay, some of them will be very familiar. Moshe, Aaron. You can start counting if you want, but basically we're going to see that Rashi, the Bahag, which is the Baal HaChok Dolot, that he quotes, gets up to 46. Rashi is going to take one off his list and put a different one in instead. And then he's going to say the last 2, I really don't know who they are. Okay, can't come up with the number 48. But here we'll read very quickly. Yoshua Pinchas, he quotes some psukim to prove that some of them were Nevi'im. I'm going to skip that because I just want to get to the list. Elkanah, Eli, Shmuel, Gad, Natan, David, Shlomo, Ido, Michayahu ben Yimla, Ovadia, Achia, Shiloni, Yehu ben Chanani. I can read Bimei Asa in the times of Asa the king. Azariah ben Oded, Chaziel, Levi, Mibnei Betanya, Elazar ben Dodava, Mimoresha, Kulam b'yimei Yehoshaphat b'divrei Hayamim. Okay, those were in Yehoshaphat, and they're all mentioned in Divrei Hayamim and Chronicles. B'yimei Ravam ben Yoash, there was Hoshea and Amos. B'yimei Yotam, Micha HaMorashti. B'yimei Amatzia, Amos. Amos Amar, okay, we're going to skip that. His pasuk. Eliyahu, Elisha, Yonah ben Amittai, Yeshayahu b'yimei Menashe. Okay, they were in the time of Menashe. Yoel, Nachum, Chavakuk b'yimei Yoshiyahu. Tzfanya, Uriah, Mikiryat Yaharim, Yirmiyahu Bagola, Yechezkel, Daniel, B'shnat Bet Daryavesh, Baruch Neriah, Sraya, Machsaya, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, Mordechai, Bilshan, that's Mordechai from ours. That's the list. But then he says, and that's in the book Seder Olam, Al Dani, that was quoted by the Bahag. Al Daniel, it says, Inu Nevi'eh, Ve'iu lo Nevi'eh. They were prophets, but Chagai, Zechariah, and Mishael, but Malachi, but not Daniel. So he takes them off the list. Ala Apik Daniel, and what does he put in instead? Ayel Shmaya. Says Shamar Rechavam. He finds someone from the time of Rechavam who says, right, the son of Shlomo, who says, Al ta'alu v'al tilachamu machechem b'nei Israel. So he must have been a prophet. And then he says, Shnayim lo yadati. It's nice to see that Rashi sometimes says, I just don't know, right? Sometimes we can't always know everything. Rabbeinu Hananel has a different count. So if you want to look, I don't have time in this class, but Rabbeinu Hananel appears on the side and he has a list that's a little bit different than Rashi's. Okay, so there are your 48. The Gemara does not go into it, maybe because the list is too long, I don't know. But the Gemara is going to go into who are the 7 female prophets. Okay, so now, before we get there, we're going to have 2 other drashot on this word ramatayim, what it means. So we're going to say now, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar, Adam haba mishte ramot shetzafot zo et zo. Talk about not understanding things. I don't fully understand this, but they're saying Elkanah came from a place where there were these 2 mountains facing each other. Maybe he lived in the middle of the 2. I'm not sure, because how could you come from 2 different mountains? But that's what it means, ramatayim. There were 2 mountains facing each other. Maybe like one city had these 2 mountains in it. Maybe that's what it means. Rabbi Chanin Amar Adam haba mishne b'nei Adam she'omdim berumo shel olam. Ramatayim, from the language of high, right? So did the earlier one. The earlier one said mountains that are high. This is from people that stood at a certain height, okay, at a high place. What does this mean? Uman ninu, who are they? B'nei Korach. Elkanah was descended from the sons of Korach. Remember, Korach and his family, right? Korach and all the people with him get swallowed up into the ground. Except it says the B'nai Korach lo metu. This is said later on in Tvarim when it's listing some genealogy. It says the sons of Korach didn't die. The Midrash says that they repented and therefore they didn't go with their father in the end and therefore didn't die. And now we're going to see what does it mean birumo shel olam, at a high place. Tana mishum Rabbeinu makom nitbatzer lahem begenom va'amdu alav. God basically fortified a spot that was high up in Gehenom, meaning above Gehenom, right? The ground swallowing up is like hell, basically, that swallowed everybody up in the ground. And God created this spot that was nearby, that was high up, where they were able to stand there and be protected from being swallowed up in the ground because they repented. And therefore, that's who it's referring to. Ramatayim is a reference to the B'nai Korach and saying Elkanah came from them. Sheva Neviot Mayin Ninhu. Basically, the rest of our daf is going to be talking about these 7 Neviot. Okay, it's a good women's daf about all these women leaders. Well, you'll see they have a little bit negative to say about them toward the end of the daf, at least about 2 of them. Who are these 7 Neviot? Sarah, Miriam, Dvorah, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, Esther. Okay, we're going to go one by one. How do we know they were prophets? We're now going to say some of them, it's going to say explicitly, and some of them, it's going to be something they said, which was clearly prophesizing something for the future. Sarah dichtiv, Avi Malka, Avi Yiska. Okay, hers is actually a little bit different. It's neither one of the 2 that I just said. But now we're going to darshan this word Yiska. Okay, so it talks about, right, her father was the father of Milcah and the father of Yiska. This is Haran, Sarah's father. And so now he was the father of Yiska. They say Yiska is Sarah. Amar Yitzchak Yiska zo Sarah. V'lamani kachma Yiska. So why was she called Yiska? Her name was Sarah. Shesachta beruach hakodesh. The root sach here is to see. She was able to see in Ruach HaKodesh. So here her name is telling us that she was a prophet. Here's another reference. It says anything Sarah says, listen to her. This was told to Abraham when they were arguing. Should listen to her. Why doesn't it just say Shema? It should say Shema. It should just say Shema. Whatever Sarah says, listen. Why does it say Bikola? Because her call is a call of Ruach HaKodesh. Okay, that's what we say. She knew the what was true because of the divine spirit that was in her. V'lamana kashma yiska. Sorry, I went back. Davar acher yiska. Shakol sochim biyofya. Different translation of yiska, which has nothing to do with her being a prophet, is everybody looks at her beauty. Okay, because again, it has to do with looking. But this is a different kind of looking, not that she looks into the future because she's a prophetess, but the people are looking at her because she's so beautiful. Miriam, right? We see her beauty in other places when when Avraham went down to Egypt and he said, oh, my wife is beautiful, etc. Miriam, dichtiv, vatikach Miriam haniviyah achot Aharon. Now, what's weird about it says, first of all, it says vatikach Miriam haniviyah. Okay, so Miriam is a niviyah. That's clear from the pasuk. It already calls her a prophetess. But now what we're going to see is Miriam Nevi'ah achot Aharon. So now it says this is when she takes the tof, right? And after Moshe sings Az Yashir, she takes a tof and starts singing with the women. Now, why is she called achot Aharon, the sister of Aaron? She should be called the sister of Moshe, v'lo achot Moshe. Amar Rav Nachman Amarav Shaita mitnab'a k'shehi achot Aharon. When was her prophecy that made her a Nevi'ah? That's why she's called Nevi'ah Achot Aharon, because her prophecy was when she was the sister of Aaron only, before Moshe was born. Here's her prophecy. It's an interesting story. Right? In the future, my mother's going to give birth to a son who will save the Jewish people. That's what she told her family. When Moshe was born, the whole house filled with light. I assume it's because Karan or Panei Moshe, and the end of it right later on in life. So I think they bring it in. It must be when he was born. And also just the happiness of having the son and having the son that they know will be the ultimate one who will save the Jewish people. Amar Avia Unishakar, Shasar, her father is so proud of her. He kisses her on the head. Amar la biti nitkayma nivuatech. Your prophecy came true. But what happens? Then they have to send him into the water and into the Nile. He slaps her on the head. Right? It's obviously in those days, right? Slapping people was kind of accepted, right? Or at least it wasn't the way perceived as it is now. Anyway, it's just a story. And he gets upset with her and he says, where's your prophecy now? So why is this all brought? This is brought to explain why is Miriam the one who goes to watch what's going to happen to Moshe. Right out of the parsha from yesterday. What did she want to know? Almost like it's a selfish reason, according to this, right? She wanted to know that she was so convinced that he was going to live that she wanted to see the fulfillment of her prophecy. Okay, end of Miriam. Next one. Dvorah dechtiv. Udvora isha neviah eshet lapidot. So again, it says explicitly that Devorah, this is in Shoftim, in the book of Judges, she is a neviah, okay? And she's also called eshet lapidot. What is eshet lapidot? In other words, again, this has nothing to do with it, but they want to know, since we quoted this verse, what else do we have to say about this verse? My eshet lapidot, shaitau septilot lamikdash. She made the wicks for the temple. Okay, it wasn't the temple at that time, it was the tabernacle, the Mishkan, but she was making wicks. That's why she's called Eshet Lapidot. It's not that she was the wife of Lapidot, she was a woman of Lapidot, okay, that she was making Lapidot. Vihi yoshevet tachat tomer. Continues, she would sit under the date tree, the palm tree, and she would judge the people. Why would she sit under a palm tree specifically? Ma'ishna tachat tomer. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Avshalom mishum yichud. What's unique about a palm tree, right? It's very tall and the leaves are all the way at the top and they don't really provide any shade or cover. She didn't want to be with men underneath a tree that, something could happen and people would suspect her of inappropriate behavior, right? Apropos our, unfortunately, every week there seems to be another person who abused their power to do inappropriate things. So here she wanted to be, right? This is a good lesson, right? Even in those days, to make sure that whatever you do, it's out in public and you're not doing anything and using your power in any way to sexually abuse anybody else. Next, again, I don't know if it's exactly talking about that, but you can definitely see it here. Davar acher, ma tamar ze ein lo ela lev echad. Okay, the palm tree has one central branch, basically. And that's right. That's what we call levavot dekel, right? Hearts of palm. That's what hearts of palm are called in Hebrew. They have one heart. The people of her generation only have one heart for God, which is interesting to say because in Shoftim, it was all over the place, basically, right? It was, people were definitely not really believing in God, but what they say in her time, she was such a good leader. And this is always, we talked about this many times, that a good leader is not only a good person, but able to influence the people around them. And she apparently was able to do that. Okay, in case I didn't explain well enough, yichud is basically a halacha that a man and a woman can't be alone in a place without people seeing them, lest something might happen, right? So that's yichud. Okay, I'm not going to get into all the details, right? How many people, how many this, anyway, that's not our issue. Chana, okay, we're moving on now to Chana. She was also dichtiva titpalel Chana v'tomar. Now here it doesn't say the word nivi'ah, but she prays and says, Alatz libi b'Hashem, okay, my heart will rejoice with God, Rama karni b'Hashem, okay, which is hard exactly to translate, but my horn will be high with God, Rama karni v'lo Rama pachi. What she said is, and this was a prophecy, she said the Karen will be high with God, but not the pach, which is a jug. So now what are we talking about here? David u'Shlomo, she was prophesying about the future kings. David u'Shlomo nimshechu bekeren nimshecha machutan. They anointed the kings with oil. Now they either put it in a jug or they put it in a keren, in a horn. So they were anointed with a horn. And therefore, Ramah Karni B'Hashem, that means those with a keren, their kingdom will continue forever. But Shaul v'Yehu shenimshechu b'pach lo nimshecha machutam. But Yehu and Shaul, there were two kings that were anointed with a pach of shemen, with a jug, lo nimshecha machutan, and that you learn from Ramah Karni B'Hashem. That was her prophecy. Ein kadosh kashem ki ein beltecha. Now we're going to darshan some other things she said. Now again, it's repetitive. Ein kadosh kashem. There's no one holy like God, and because there's nobody like God. Well, that's the same thing as saying there's no one sanctified like God. So Amar Rav Yehuda ben Menashe, al tikri biltecha. It doesn't mean there's no one like God. Ela liv valotecha. There's no one that outlives God. Shelo k'midat hakadosh baruch hu midat basar v'dam. This is one of the big, like many. There's many differences between the way humans are and the way God is. Midat basar v'dam aseh yadav mevalino to. If I create something, it depends how well I create it, but many things I create outlive me, right? Whether it be children, grandchildren, or whether it be objects that I make, right? They can outlive me. But, right, that's at least the natural course of events. Doesn't always work out that way, but it's a natural course. But God outlives everything he created. Continuing with the tefillah of Hannah. Okay, there's no one who can draw like God. Adam a man draws a picture on a wall and can't add life to it. Okay, like say other than right, they didn't know about animation in those days, but okay, animation anyway isn't real life, and right, and can't put in the stomach and intestines and all those things. Okay, maybe animated characters don't have that. Right, but God can do that. God can basically create an image and then add life to it, and body parts and organs that function, etc. That's the end of Hannah. Now we're going to move on to Avigail. Avigail. What's the story with Avigail? We actually saw this not so long ago in the daf, but I'll repeat the story. Avigail is married to Naval. This is in Shmuel Aleph, end of Shmuel Aleph. Right around the time when David had been anointed to be king, but Shaul was still alive. So it was this in-between stage, which we're going to see later. Avigail is married to Naval. Okay, Kishmo Kenhu. Naval is, a disgraceful person. He wasn't a great character. He was very wealthy. And David felt that he should be giving him part of what he has. So, right, he sheared a sheep, and David sent messengers to say, give me part of what you have because I'm the king, etc. Right? Kings can do that. So David sends messengers, and Naval says, Mi David mi ben Yishai. I don't know who you're talking about, right? Totally disgracing David. David says, wow, this guy is moreh b'machut. He basically, right, rebelled against the king, deserving of death. David goes to kill him, and Avigail comes and meets David on the way. And she basically pleads with him not to kill her husband. David, in the end, agrees, okay, and doesn't kill the husband. We're going to see parts of the conversation now between them, and doesn't kill Naval. She comes home and tells Naval what happened. And in the end, basically, Naval dies. I think it's 10 days later. And then David marries her. Basically, David sends for her and marries her. Okay, she becomes married to the king, to David. Okay, so right. So again, it's this in between stage. He was anointed to be king, but or chosen to be king, but he wasn't yet king. Okay, he wasn't functioning as king. So that's why it's a little bit tricky that he claims that Naval was moreh b'machut. In the end, Avigail is going to say, "But you're not yet king." Okay, so you can't do this. So let's read what they're going to say about Avigail and how we know she was a prophet also. Avigail, dichtiv, v'haya hi rochevet al chamor v'yoredet b'seiter rahal. So this is when she's going out to meet David. She's riding on her donkey, and she goes down b'seiter rahal, in the hidden part of the mountain. So b'seiter rahal, minahar mebayit. Should have said she's coming down the mountain, from the mountain, not she's coming down from the hidden part of the mountain. What is this? So they say, Amar Rabba bar Shmuel, classic. Okay, let's bring halacha into what happened in the stories of the, our stories of our tradition. Basically, she was coming down about something secretive, which is she was coming to ask David halachic questions about the status of the blood she saw that was it problematic blood that would make her impure or not? Okay, so Natzala dam beheratalo. So she takes the blood from, her clothing and shows David, says, what's the halacha about this blood? Amarla. Now you'll see that this was all a setup. So Amarla, v'chi mar'in dam balayla. So he says, we don't look at dam at night because at night it's dark. We can't really tell the color. If we'd use a candle, it would affect the color. We wouldn't be able to tell the color properly. We don't check these things at night. So Amarlo, v'chi danim dinei nefashot balayla. Well, we don't do, right? The courts don't rule under the death penalty at night either. So why are you coming to kill my husband? You can't do this at night. So it was all a setup basically to say, why you can't come and judge my husband right now because it's nighttime. Now, obviously there's a play on words and we're going to see it inside soon about the blood, right? The blood of the death and the blood of the nida. So Amarla, which is interesting also, I guess, because nida blood also brings life, right? It shows she can menstruate, she can bring life. Anyway, I don't know. That's another aside. Okay, so what does he say to her? He doesn't even need a judgment because he went against the king. That doesn't even need judgment. Interesting, they say that, right? What would happen to innocent to proven guilty? Obviously, they don't, right? Anyone who's morei b'malchut can be killed immediately. They don't need judgment. So I'm not coming here to judge him. Amralo, what are you talking about? Here's where we see what we said before. Shaul is still alive, and you're not. Your stamp has not become. You're not king yet. Okay, you might have been chosen to be king, but you're not actually acting king yet. So this isn't morei b'malchut. Basically, it's not treason as we would call it. Amarla, baruch ta'amechu brucha at. Okay, this is the verse there. He says to her, Baruch ta'amechu brucha at, right? Blessed is your reason and blessed are you. Asher kilitani hayom hazeh bo b'damim. That you stop me today from dealing with blood. Okay, now notice damim is plural. So the Gemara is going to say damim tarte mashma. Blood has two connotations here. One is, right, not to kill him. And number two, her dam nida. Why? You can learn from here that she revealed her thigh a little bit, and he got very excited and desired her very strongly that he jumped 3 parsaot toward her. Amar la hisham ili, he said, I want to sleep with you. Amra lo, she said to him, this is also a quote from the pasuk that she says also in that section, actually a little bit before that one. She says, right, which makes sense, because then he says, thank you for saving me. So 2 psukim before, she says, "V'lo tiyeh zot lecha lefuka ulemichshol." Okay, ulemichshol lev la'adoni ulishpoch dam chinam, right? This shouldn't be for you. A fuka and a michshol, right? This shouldn't basically mess you up. Okay, maybe here from the double language, they get that there were 2 things here. Okay, and she says, basically, that you didn't slip up. Basically, that's why she showed him the dam nida. I'm menstruating now, so you can't sleep with me. Now, why that bothered him more than the fact that she was married to someone, I don't know, right? Maybe because he felt that the married person was a dead man, okay, and wasn't really alive because he was deserving of death. Maybe it wasn't the halachicness about it, but it was the issue of that she had blood there and he just didn't want to sleep with her, but maybe, okay, unclear exactly. Anyway, we're now at the prophecy though. What does she say? Because we haven't gotten to that yet. So she said, Lo tiyeh zot lecha lefuka. This shouldn't be for you a mess up, a stumbling block, right? But zot michlal de'ika achrite. From zot, you can infer that there will be another one that will mess you up. And she was basically prophesizing about Batsheva. Umaynihu ma'aseh de Batsheva. Umaskana hachi havai, right? And then that's the conclusion that, in other words, what she said actually happened. Okay, so she prophesizes to the fact that this will happen to him again, and somebody will actually mess him up on this. Okay, next woman. Oh no, sorry, we're not up to the next woman. Now they're going to quote another verse. She basically says to him, okay, I'll read the psukim. She says, when vayakam adam lirot fechem, in Shmuel Aleph kafhe pasuk kaftet. Okay, she now says, if somebody comes up against you, she gives him like a bit of a bracha, okay, for not killing Naval. She says, if somebody comes up against you, wants to kill you, where do we know this from? This is what we put on graves, right? Comes from here. So your nefesh, right? You should basically be among the living. Right? You should be able to basically overcome your enemies. Okay, so now it's not so clear why they quote this verse. Some people say it really doesn't belong here because they don't darshan this. But now they quote another verse that she says, Ki ava miftara mipatra mine ambrale vehitiv Hashem la'adoni v'zacharta et amatecha. Okay, she says to him 2 psukim later, after this pasuk about the tzror chayim, she then says to him, right, she says again, it's the pasuk we just quoted, this shouldn't be lefukah u'lemechshol, and then it says, Ulishpoch tam chinam, uloshia adoni lo, vehetiv Hashem adoni. Okay, God will make things good for you because you did this. V'zacharta et amatecha, and you will remember me. What does she mean? You'll remember me. Okay, what she's basically saying is, when my husband does die, don't forget about me and come and marry me. Okay, she's basically alluding to the fact that she wants to marry him down the road. Right? A very strange story. You have to remember, she was married to this guy Naval who was really not a very, very good person. And she knows that, right? She goes out to support him, but she knows that he's a no goodnik, and she's kind of happy to marry David. So, at least according to the way they understand this. Amar Rav Nachman, here we have some funny things. Hainu da amri inashe, this is what people say about women. Itata bahade shuta pilcha. Okay, a woman, while she's speaking, okay, bahade shuta, while she's speaking, pilcha, she's spinning her wool, right? In other words, she's in one story saving her husband, but she's already spinning the wool for the future. This is, like you say, women are good at multitasking, and that you're thinking about the future at the same time that you're dealing with the present. So while she's dealing with the present, she's also spinning her wool for the future and kind of creating, where she's going from here. Iga de Amre, some people say, Shafil va'azil bar avza, a goose walks with his head down, but a nohui mitaife, but their eyes are looking up. Okay, so the head's down, meaning it's the same idea. She's in this, but she's got her eyes looking toward the future, planning for the future. Okay, done with Avigal, moving on to Chulda. Chulda, dichtiv, who is Chulda? So you have to remember Sefer Melachim, where there's King Yoshiyahu, who's one of the good kings of the Judean kingdom toward the end, when it's already pretty bad. He's this light in the middle of this darkness in the Judean kingdom. And he does this reformation of the temple. And in the process, he finds this Sefer Torah, and it's open to this page open to the section where it talks about basically the Jews are going to get kicked out of the land. And he basically goes to look for a prophet who's going to tell him what the story is. And who do they go to? They go to Chulda, the Neviah. Okay, so we're going to talk about that now. And then she basically says, well, because you're a good, right? He does this whole reformation and he gets rid of all the idols and he becomes a good king. And she basically, although one of the issues was as opposed to what we said about Dvorah, is that he didn't really get the people to change. And that's why in the end, the destruction comes. And what Chulda says is the destruction is going to come, but it's not in your time. Okay. So that's what he gets for that. So let's see about Chulda. Dichtiv. Okay, notice, by the way, their names are a bunch of these names are animal names. There's Achbor, there's Shafan, right? Achbor sounds like Achbar, a mouse. There's Shafan, which is a type of rabbit. And then there's also Chulda, which is a marten. So also an animal. So anyway, we'll get back to her name later. So what happens is Yoshiyahu turns to Chilkiyahu, and Chilkiyahu goes and basically him and a whole bunch of his people. Okay, I'll read you the rest of the verse because otherwise you don't really understand it. It says they go El Chulda Haneviyah. Okay, they go and they seek out Chulda. Okay, Yoshiyahu didn't, but his people go. Okay, later the Gemara is going to ask, why did Yoshiyahu go to Chulda? It's not really Yoshiyahu, it's his people, but still it's the same question. Why did they go to Chulda and not to Yirmiyahu, who was a prophet in their time? So anyway, they go to Chulda. Let's just read a little bit more in that verse. Eshet Shalom ben Tikva. We're going to darshan this Tikva later. Ben Charchas, which we're also going to darshan. Okay, that's why I wanted you to see this here. Okay, so she's the wife of Shalom ben Tikva ben Charchas. In the end, they're going to say that shows her lineage, even though it's really talking about her husband. So it's a little tricky. But anyway, that's what we're going to darshan later. So basically, they start asking. So there we see she was a prophet because she's called Chulda Neviah. But then it says, how could she possibly prophesy if Yirmiyahu is the main guy at that time? He was the prophet, right? How could you do that? So we're going to have a few different answers. It wasn't a slap in his face because she was his relative. So I guess what it meant, the way I understand it is, she kind of, her ability to prophesy really came from him because she was his relative. So if she prophesizes, it's like Yirmiyahu. That's answer number one. So it wasn't a slap in his face. Yoshiyahu, so now they want to know before they even answer the question otherwise, which they're going to see, which is, or the truth is that's already the answer, that she was a relative, therefore it was okay. But now they say, Yoshiyahu gufei chishabik Yirmiyahu mishadr legaba. That explains how she could have prophesied, and it won't be a slap in the face to Yirmiyahu. But how could Yoshiyahu go ask her and not ask Yirmiyahu? That doesn't make much sense. So for that, there are going to be a few answers. He was looking for someone who was going to have Rahmanut on him and pray to God for him. Yirmiyahu was not exactly known to be an ish of Rahmanut, okay, right? He always got into fights with the people. He ends up getting put in jail. He wasn't exactly this Rahman. Women are known to be, right? We see all these things about women in general in this daf about multitask or looking toward the future. Women also are known to be more compassionate. So he was looking for someone who would be compassionate for him and basically get this. He knew that he didn't really need to go to a prophet to say what was going to be. It was clear from the verse that they're going to be exiled. So what he needed really from a Navi was compassion. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Yirmiyahu lo hava hatam. I see someone wrote this in the chat. Yirmiyahu wasn't there at the time. That's the second answer. Shalach lachzir aseret hashvatim. Right? Where could he be? He went back to get the 10 shvatim back. Remember, the Israelite kingdom was already sent to exile. So he went to bring them back. Minal and Dihadar. How do we know that he brought them back? Dichtiv. Yechezkel, who's after this time, says, Ki hamocher el hamimkar lo yashuv. You will get to a point where someone who sells the property, it won't be given back to him. Why? Because there'll be no laws of the Jubilee year anymore. Now, if he's saying in the future, right, there's going to be no laws, he's prophesizing about the destruction. He says, right, a time's going to be where there's going to be no laws of the Jubilee year. There already was no Yovel. Why was there already no Yovel? There's no Yovel laws when the majority of the Jews aren't living in Israel. Now, if the 10 tribes have exiled, clearly the majority of the Jews aren't living and they must not have been doing Yovel anymore. Now, how could Yechezkel come and say there'll come a time when there will be no Yovel if there wasn't Yovel already? So therefore, Yirmiyahu must have brought them back, in which case the majority of the Jews were living. They reinstated Yovel, and Yechezkel saying basically this will stop at some point. The Yoshiyahu ben Amal malach alehem, and Yoshiyahu was king over them. How do we know that? Dichtiv. Okay, without getting into all the details, there's a strange story in the beginning of Sefer Melachim where a Navi comes after Yeravam ben Nevat puts up these Eglei Zahav in Beit El and Dan. He comes to Beit El to the Mizbeach and he tears the Mizbeach, right? He brings the sign that the Mizbeach is going to break, and basically it's signifying that one day Yoshiyahu, he even says him by name, is going to come and destroy all the idols that you built in your temple. So that there's a whole strange story that happens with him. I'm not going to get into it, but he doesn't follow some of the rules and he ends up dying right there and he gets buried there. And so when Yoshiyahu does this reformation around the country, he says, what is this grave here? In Beit El, the people of the city. Now, who are the people of the city? People of the city must be Israelites who were living there who had a tradition from their forefathers, who said, this is the grave of the guy who basically predicted what you were going to do. So what is he saying? Basically that there must have been Jews living there from the Israelite kingdom. Otherwise, who else would know who this kever is? And that's in Beit El. Beit El was part of the Israelite kingdom. So therefore, what was he doing there? First of all, what was he even going there for if the Israelite kingdom wasn't part of our land anymore? Must be they brought back the Aseret HaShvatim and he was king over them. One more proof for this. It's a prophecy saying basically Yehoshua is going to be ruler over, right, when I bring back the people from their exiles. So that's also a reference to it. Okay, Esther. Dichtiv, right, on the third day when she goes to the king, Vatabash Esther Malchut. She wears royalty. Big day Malchut Mabaila. It should have been she wore clothes of royalty, not she wore royalty. Unless she levashta Ruach HaKodesh. It's a reference to the fact that she had Ruach HaKodesh with her. Ktiv Hacha Vatilbash. How do we know that Vatilbash is Ruach HaKodesh? Ktiv Hatam Beruach Lavshat Amisai. Okay, this is Amasai. Where Ruach Lavshat. We're not going to get into the details of that story, but there you see Ruach with Ruach HaKodesh. Amar Rav Nachman. Here we have this aside, though, about these women. Lo ya'eh yihiruta l'nashe. It's not very appropriate when women act haughtily. Tarte, two of these women, Tarte Nashe, Yehir and Havyan, they acted haughtily. Usanyan Shmayu, and this is going to explain why their names are hated. What does that mean? Chadashma Ziborta. One is Ziborta, which is Dvorah, which is a hornet. Everybody hates hornets. The Chadashma Karkushta. And one is a martin, which is Hulda. right? Why do they have these awful names of animals that people hate? Zibor taktiv ba, because they were both haughty. It says by Devorah, vatishlach vatikha Barak. She sends out and calls for Barak. She doesn't go to him, she makes him come to her. Karkush taktiv imru la'ish. Huldah says, tell the man, which is Yoshiyahu the king. She didn't say tell the king. That was inappropriate. Because of that, they got names that were not nice names. Okay, last part for today. Amar Rav Nachman. She was descended from Yoshua. How do we know this? He was born in Timnat Cheres, and she was called Ben Charchas, right? Or her husband was from Ben Charchas. So therefore, she must have been descended from the Charchas, and the Cheres must be the same. She must be descended from Yoshua. Rabbeinu Saba says to Rav Nachman, wait. It says, Shmona Nevi'im behem kohanim yatzu me'rachav hazonah ve'eluhem, Neriah, Baruch, Yisraya, Machseh, Yirmiyahu, Chilkiyahu, Chanamael, v'Shalom. These Nevi'im, who were also kohanim, came from Rachav. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af Chodah Nevi'ah mibnei banah sherachav hazonah. She was also from Rachav. How do we know this? Tivhacha ben Tikva, also her husband was from Ben Tikva. Uktivhatam et Tikvat chut hashani. That's what it says by Rachav. She put out that string, remember? Amar la, so he says to him, Anasaba, Amar le pata ukama. Some people say, you blackened pot. Okay, in other words, he called him either by name or he called him you blackened pot. He says, what are you talking about? Mina, mine, winach testayim shmata. For me and you, we'll get it together. This is like the Achashverosh and Haman that we started with. It's the combination of the two, right? She converted and Yehoshua married her. And that's how she comes from Yehoshua and she comes from Rachav. Wait, did they have children? Did Yehoshua have children? In the Chronicles, it says Num beno, Yehoshua beno, and it ends there as if he didn't have any children. So they say, Beni lo have bintan havule. He didn't have sons, but he did have daughters, and from his daughters came Huldah Hanaviyah. That will finish for today, and we'll continue our dress show tomorrow. Have a great day and a Shavua Tov.